I have, for the last several weeks now, continued to get emails from people, and it started with a phone call over a month ago about a case called Brunson versus Adams. And it is, it's coming from people who really are in the weeds on, well, stolen election stuff more than anything, from some very right of center groups and libertarian-oriented groups, and they're focused on this case, Brunson versus Adams. And I finally had to dig into it because I kept getting, well, there were phone calls to the show, there were email after email after email. What do you think of Brunson versus Adams? What do you think of Brunson versus Adams? They think it's some sort of big deal. It's not actually that significant. And there are people out there who are telling you it's a really big deal. And I would remind all of you, and this is my cautionary tale for grifters on the right. If you are paying attention to anyone telling you Brunson versus Adams is a monumental issue on which you must pay attention, you should probably treat those people very skeptically. If you're listening to radio shows or television shows, or you're reading websites that play up Brunson versus Adams as some major significant issue, I would suggest to you, you need to turn those things off. Let me explain to you Brunson versus Adams. It is filed a case by Raylan Brunson against Alma Adams. I can just give you this information from the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. And the case, Mr. Brunson pro se, that should be your first red flag. Mr. Brunson pro se means Mr. Brunson filed this case himself. He challenged the removal of his case to federal court. What actually happened on June 21st, 2021. On June 21st, 2021, Raylan Brunson filed a lawsuit in the 2nd District Court of the state of Utah against 129 members of the United States House of Representatives, 94 of the 100 U.S. senators, President Biden, Vice President Harris, and also against former Vice President Mike Pence. He claims he wants redress for violations of his constitutionally protected right to participate in an honest and fair election. He claims that the defendant swore an oath to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. He claims they violated the Constitution and their oaths by refusing to ensure an honest and fair election. More specifically, he asserts that they were obliged to reject the Electoral College vote submissions from states whose electoral systems are so badly flawed as to render their vote submissions unreliable, untrustworthy, and unworthy of acceptance. He claims that despite this obligation, during the January 6, 2021 proceedings to count the Electoral College votes, defendants knowingly mocked their oath, in his words, and became, quote, enemies of the U.S. Constitution they swore to protect by allowing fraudulent votes to be counted. According to Mr. Brunson, the 2020 presidential election was rigged in every single state. And despite evidence of voter and election fraud, the members of Congress intentionally refused to investigate the evidence and conspired to cover it up. That it's an attack against the Constitution, and it resulted in the fraudulent inauguration of President Biden and Vice President Harris. And he wants, among other things, the immediate removal of Biden and Harris from office. He wants an order that Donald Trump immediately be allowed to be inaugurated president. And he wants damages in the amount of, it looks like, $2.905 trillion tax-free. The U.S. Attorney for Utah filed notice in the State Court of Utah. and asked that this case be removed to federal court, since so many of the people being sued aren't even in Utah. Brunson filed to demand that it go back to state court. He lost. And then he lost his case. And the case, he continued to file it, pursue it up to the district, or to the U.S. Court of Appeals. And in filing to the U.S. Court of Appeals, got judges affirmed the district court. And they threw out his case. According to them, Brunson developed no argument addressing the magistrate judge's reasoning other than to direct us to his opposition to the motion to dismiss. There's insufficient to meet the court's requirement for developing an argument on appeal, thus setting aside the antecedent inquiry whether the firm waiver rule precludes our review of this aspect of dismissal. We conclude he waived appellate review of the sovereign immunity basis. Essentially, they're saying, well, he never really posed an argument. He said a bunch of things, but didn't actually make a legal argument. They gave him the benefit of the doubt. The 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, they reviewed everything all over again, fresh. And they threw out his case. So this is where all the buzz comes in. When you lose a case in the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, your next step is to appeal it to the United States Supreme Court, which he did. It was filed October 20th, 2022, Raylan Brunson versus Alma Adams, on petition for a writ of certiorari to the United States Court of Appeals for the 10th District, a petition for a writ of cert. He writes, a serious question exists between decisions rendered from this court and lower appeals courts, along with constitutional provisions and statutes, in deciding whether or not a trial court has jurisdiction over his case. So Raylan Brunson wants the Supreme Court to take his case. What does he actually want the Supreme Court to do? He doesn't want the Supreme Court to throw out the election. That's what he wants. Keep this in mind. Legal proceeding here. So Raylan Brunson is asking that the election of 2020 be thrown out, that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris be thrown out of office, and that Donald Trump be inaugurated immediately. That's actually what they want. That's what he wants. What he's doing now is going to the Supreme Court and saying, well, the district court, the magistrate court said I don't have a case. The district court says I don't have a case. The 10th Circuit Court of Appeals says I don't have a case. I want you, the Supreme Court, to tell them I do have a case and make them hear the case. That's what he actually wants the Supreme Court to do. The Supreme Court has not made a decision on whether or not to take the case. So a lot of people who are emailing me say, what do you think of this Brunson versus Adams case? It's a really big deal, isn't it? Not really, because all he's doing is asking the Supreme Court to tell the district court in Utah that they got to take the case. He didn't even want the district court to hear it. He wanted it to go to state court in Utah, which isn't going to happen because it involves the federal election nationwide. So it would go back to the district court, which would have to give a hearing in the best case scenario. And there's no way he can win because of estoppel. What is estoppel? Estoppel is an equity issue where when you run out the clock, you can't go back in time. Even though you may be right, it's too late. So let's just give him the due. And let's just say, for sake of argument, let's say Brunson were to win, he would be stopped from proceeding. What do I mean by that? Well, you can't now say that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were illegally made president of the United States and vice president and put Donald Trump back in. You would have to have the election done over, which isn't going to happen. But on top of that, it's been so long. We're in December of 2022. We now have a member of the U.S. Supreme Court appointed by Joe Biden. The entirety of the Congress has operated as if he was by law, lawful president of the United States. So even for sake of argument, Brunson were right. There's nothing you can do to undo it. But that's for sake of argument. I mean, what Brunson is arguing is that all 50 states had fraudulent elections. No one has claimed that until now. This seems like a nutty lawsuit, but even nutty lawsuits get their due. And this, again, is why I'm hard-pressed to be sympathetic to the people who are so bought into all the stolen election crap from 2020. Here is a system of laws in this country where a man can file a lawsuit in the state of Utah, get it into federal court, sue everyone from the president of the United States to the former president of the United States to 200-plus members of Congress, and get it all the way to the Supreme Court and ask them to hear it. And he's probably going to be thrown out. They're probably not going to take it. They might, but what happens if they take it? Well, then they got to agree or disagree. If they disagree, it dies. If they agree, all it does is it goes back to district court where he's got to have a hearing. By then, it's a little too late. By then, it'll be, 2024? And you'll be in the middle of another election. So no, this isn't a big case. What I'm fascinated by are the people who have been sold a bill of goods that it is a big case. Again, there are clearly people on some websites and some TV shows and some radio shows telling you that this is a really big case, that this is a profoundly big, game-changing case. It's not. This is a petition of writ for certiorari to the United States Supreme Court. That's it. It's on the docket for January 6th, not to be heard, but to be considered for whether or not they should hear it or not. That's all that's happened. So again, if you're listening to people tell you this is a really big deal, if you're reading websites telling you this is a really big deal, you need to not listen to those people. I'm not even telling you listen to me. I'm just telling you stop listening to these people because this is crap. I mean, this is nothing here. This is a man who thinks that every single state conducted a fraudulent election in 2020, that the election should be thrown out, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris should be thrown out of office, and Donald Trump should be installed into office by order of the Supreme Court, whose Chief Justice swore in Joe Biden. That doesn't make sense to sane people. What will happen is when this goes down in flames, the people who are emotionally invested in it and grifting, taking your money and grifting, will tell you it just is another example of how rigged the system is. Because they won't admit they were wrong. They can't admit they overplayed it. They can't admit they built it up. They will have to tell you the whole system is rigged against you. It's terrible and awful. It's a tragedy. We must fight harder. Send us more money, and we will fight harder on your behalf. What I find remarkable and commendable here, though, is that a single man has dragged over 200 members of Congress, the president, vice president, and the former vice president to the United States Supreme Court, and everyone has humored him along the way. Everyone has allowed this case to proceed. He's had setback after setback, and still he proceeds. And that's great American tenacity. It's also a little crazy, but it's tenacity. And now he is before the United States Supreme Court that will decide the case. What a country we are. What a fantastic country we are that a single individual can file this lawsuit and take it all the way to the Supreme Court to say, please take my case. They probably won't. But whether they do or they don't, he got that opportunity. And for a man who is arguing that our system is completely rigged and everyone violated their oaths of office and everything is stacked against him and there was fraud in every election in every state in the country, they've allowed him to carry this case all the way to the United States Supreme Court and make his argument. That doesn't sound like a system that's rigged and filled with fraud. It sounds like a system of the people, for the people, and by the people, however flawed they may be. That, to that extent, is why this case matters.